Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Romijn Bodine, Anna Frizzarin, Valeria Occelli, and Fetiye Erbil will talk about continuous professional development for staff and diversity sensitivity.
So in this video we are going to talk about professional development and diversity sensitivity. Can you explain to me why that's an important topic to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So we see that in many schools in Europe, diversity is increasing. So classrooms are what we call nowadays super diverse. So basically that means that it's no longer about the individual characteristics that children can differ in. So it's not just about their cultural background or gender or skin color, but it's also about how these different characteristics interact with one another. So it's also about the awareness that this means that for some children they experience disadvantage and inequalities in more than one way. So for instance, you can be female but also have a black skin color and a learning disability. So we believe schools should be a place where every child is equally supported in their well-being and in their development. So that basically means that if we want to treat children fairly, we should give them the best possible support for their individual needs and not just treating everyone the same. And in order to do that, we need teachers who are actually sensitive to the differences children have. And so they need to know that children are different, they should acknowledge these differences, they need to learn how to value these differences and accept them, and they need to learn how to adjust their own behavior in order to fully support every child. And we know that this diversity sensitivity that teachers need to have is not yet optimal developed in all teachers. So it's something we see in research, but it's also something that teachers indicate themselves. So if you ask teachers, do you feel ready for the diverse classrooms? Many teachers indicate that they do feel ill-prepared. And I think that's why we need continuous professional development.
Yeah, and so what is continuous professional development?
So professional development refers to all the activities and all the actions you do that focus on teacher training, teacher education, and teacher development. And the word continuous refers to the fact that this is an ongoing process. So it's basically something that you always keep doing. Like as a teacher, you are never done learning. You start in your initial teacher training, but that's only the beginning, and you continue to develop long after that. Now, like I said, it's about all the activities you do, so there are a lot of different forms of professional development, but we know that not all of these forms are equally effective. So if we want professional development to be effective, we need to consider the three key elements of development. So those are basically the who, the what, and the how. So for the who, you always need to take into account that professional development is for someone. So what are the experience or the knowledge that your learner, so the teacher, already has? Does the teacher have the will to change, or are they feeling a bit more resistant to change? Do they experience certain problems within their own school text that they feel they have a need to learn more about a specific topic, yes or no? And that brings us to the second key element. So professional development, it's always about a certain topic or a certain content area that you focus on. So for instance, knowledge or skills, or if you want to change your beliefs or your practices. And depending on what topic you want to address or what knowledge or skills you're aiming for, there are different strategies that you can use that are more or less effective to change those. And so that is the third and the final key component. So how to facilitate change? Well, there are different strategies that you can use here. And in a moment, Fetiye will tell you a little bit more about that.
So is that all there is to know about professional development?
Well, there's one more thing I would like to add. So development, it's always a process that's within an individual. So if you want to change, there's a learning process that's going on that you have to do yourself. So if you want to learn new skills, change your behaviors, those are individual processes that are starting, and there are different mechanisms that you should be aware of, or mechanisms that you can use to facilitate this change. And Valeria will tell you a bit more about that in a second. But even though it's an individual process, I think we should not forget that teachers are always individuals within a bigger context. So they are always part of a classroom, part of a bigger team of teachers and support staff within a school, within a local community. And if we want professional development to be really sustainable, so to make the change last, we need to take this context into account and need to make sure that it's adapted to the different contexts teachers work in.
So what is happening within the individual?
So learners who engage, who undergo a professional development initiative activity, necessarily brings to the process a whole set of characteristics which are different from one individual to another. And those characteristics are linked to their cultural background, to their upbringing, to their beliefs, as well as their knowledge, skills, expertise. And those aspects, those factors need to be taken into account while designing, while conducting professional development activities. Why do they matter? They matter because they inform, they have an impact on the way teachers, who in this case are learners as well, approach the activity, the learning process. They affect the learning process as a whole. Learners who undergo a professional development activity, who start a professional, who engage in a professional development activity, bring to the process a whole set of characteristics which are different from one individual to another, who are linked to the cultural background, to the upbringing, beliefs, as well as expertise, skills. And we need to take those aspects, those factors into account, because they affect the learner's motivation, they affect the way they approach the learning process, and they affect, I would say, the learning process as a whole. People might have different approaches to the learning process, as I said. They might sometimes even not be completely on board. They might think that they might have some sort of resistance. They might question whether these activities apply to them. They might wonder why those things matter. Why should I be involved, committed into this kind of activities? But those people who are actually involved and believe that those are important aspects of their professional activity, they might have a different set of questions. They might wonder, what do I know about these topics? What do I know about diversity? How do I represent diversity and inclusion in my mind? And what are the skills I already have that might help me in my profession? Or at the same time, on the other side of the coin, they might wonder, what should I learn? What should I, do I know all I need already? Or what else should I know, and should I be able to perform as a teacher who is inclusive, who can embrace diversity in my activity, in my profession? They might even have biases. So just to give a textbook definition of a bias. Bias is an automatic thought process which help us to deal with the high amount of information we are constantly dealing with, information that is very often, most of the time, very complex. So biases help us to simplify the complexity and the high amount of information we are constantly dealing with. So they have, they are effective, they can help us, but at the same time, they lead to simplification. And we know that simplification most of the time, very often at least, lead to prejudice, to a misrepresentation of the reality. So we might, just to give you an example, we might not even probably aware of that, but maybe when teachers have a kid from a different ethnicity, they might, again, not being fully aware of this, but they might consider that kid probably unlikely to excel in the class. Or girls tend to be considered more prone to excel in certain type of tasks, like verbal tasks as compared to maths, for instance, and the other way around for boys. Those are all biases that constantly hinder our activity as teachers. So now, these are all, as I said, all factors that affect teachers' profession, teachers' work, but they also need to be considered as a very important starting point for the whole process of professional development, because they are the starting point to enable teachers to implement actually a behavioral change in their practice. It's very important to start any professional development activity with a self-reflection on this representation we might have about diversity, inclusion, and being aware of those and consider those as elements to start to change our behavior. Okay, so why is it important to reflect on our representation of these concepts? Again, just to give you an example to make things probably clearer, when a kid, for instance, draws his or her family, they might draw a family that doesn't conform exactly with what teachers have in mind as their canonical representation of a family. So probably the initial reaction would be to question the kid, to ask for clarification. This might have a very impactful effect on the kid, can be quite, can generate some discomfort in the kid. So being aware that this behavior is something that probably it's worth monitoring and in order to be avoided later on, it's something very important. So monitoring themselves, trying to progressively improve their action in the classroom is something crucial. Of course, what is experimented, what is enacted in the classroom needs to feedback and needs to nourish new self-reflection. It's a sort of circular process. The final outcome of this process should be to enable the teachers to be fully aware of the importance of their behavior in the classroom, to be fully accountable for the way they relate to the students, and to reach a feeling of full self-efficacy. So what do we mean by self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is an important concept. It relates to the teacher's belief of being able to totally and completely handle the task, the challenges, and the obligations that are related to the profession of teaching.
So, Fetiye, maybe you can tell us again why it's so important. So why do teachers and teacher candidates need professional development on diversity sensitivity?
Yeah, to start with, There's a change in the literature, in the literature on teacher professional development. We started to call it teacher learning environments, because when we talk about learning and when we talk about teaching and developing ourselves, we mostly tend to think about students, kids, young people, but we never realize that, maybe I shouldn't say never, but we mostly don't realize that teachers are also human beings, they're also learners, and they're also continuous learners. And the schools, the school communities, the classrooms, the society, they are all learning environments for teachers. So as just Bo clarified at the beginning of this video, things are changing in our world, in Europe, in our countries, and the new teachers will not be teaching in the classroom environments they were once taught. So there will be new concepts, there will be new skills, there will be new discussions on diversity and inclusion that they need to incorporate into their practices. This is why teachers, as continuous learners, need to have more professional development opportunities.
Perfect, thank you. And what are the useful strategies that can be used to promote diversity sensitivity in the professional development of teachers?
We might come up with a long list with that, but to make things a little bit clearer and simpler to follow, I can talk about three main principles, three main strategies. One would be reflection, the second would be interaction, and the third one would be collaboration. And these main principles of teacher learning should be embedded in the design of all teacher professional development activities, I would say.
So how should the principle of reflection be integrated into a teacher learning environment, and how can it help teachers to become more sensitive towards diversity?
I think in the previous part, my colleague Valeria really explained it very well, the part and the importance of reflection. But in any kind of teacher professional development activity, program, course, or a learning environment, while designing it and while enacting it, we should keep in mind that reflection should be the number one skill, the key to develop, to change. Because basically, if you want a very simple definition of reflection, I could say that it is thinking about our thinking about our actions, thinking about our beliefs, but also thinking about our behaviors and our practices, both in the school community and in the classroom. So with reflection, I'm a researcher and a teacher, so I can just easily call myself a teacher and refer to you as we. So we as teachers in these learning, professional learning environments and in all our practices, we should just reflect on our biases, like Valeria exemplified. We should reflect on our prejudices, assumptions, our deeply rooted beliefs, and our own cultural background and our own positions, how we see the world, how we perceive the world, and how we see ourselves, and whether they influence how we behave in the classroom towards children. But that's not enough. We should also look at it from a professional perspective and reflect on the classroom culture that we create, on the communication and interaction we have with the kids, and most importantly on our teaching practices.
So what can be questions that teachers need to ask themselves in terms of diversity sensitivity in their practices?
Yeah, in such environments we tend to focus more on the theory of things, and when I was a teacher candidate, when I was reading books and literature about it, I found the example questions, example reflective questions very useful. So I tried to come up with some questions. For example, when I go back to my own classroom, I would be asking myself like three main questions. For example, am I aware of the different backgrounds of my students in the classroom? What kind of diversity do they have, and what is the intersection of these diversities? Or am I aware of my own biases and how they influence my learners and also my colleagues, the other fellow teachers? And the third question would be maybe, am I creating an inclusive environment for all the learners or for all the people in the school community? And do my students feel valued, respected, and included in my classroom and in my school community?
And what is the role of interaction in teacher professional development for diversity sensitivity?
Yeah, just to remind what I said at the beginning, teachers are learners. So all learners learn in a social environment while interacting with other people. The research says that teachers learn best when they interact with their fellow teachers, their colleagues. So an example of that would be teachers getting together in different forums and asking questions about unfamiliar topics about diversity and inclusion, and engaging in discussions on challenging topics that are difficult for them to start, and maybe they would feel safe enough to talk about those things with their colleagues. And there should be some opportunities in the teacher learning programs where teachers get to listen to diverse viewpoints from their colleagues, so that it could start a fruitful learning environment.
And what's the role of collaboration in teacher professional development?
It is very close to interaction, but it is also a little bit different. In interaction, you listen to people, you learn from them, and you just express your viewpoint. But in collaboration, you start acting on those ideas. You come together with your colleagues, you create some teams, small teams, or you join these teams to professionally develop yourself. In our case, in terms of diversity, sensitivity, and inclusive practices. So in teacher learning environments, it's really crucial for teachers to come together to work on real cases from their classrooms, real scenarios and real problems that they feel the need, and so that they can share their knowledge, they can share their experience, they can share their different expertise on them. And it is also important to be a part of professional learning communities and networks so that we can widen our knowledge and our practices. But one suggestion I should be making here is that I'm talking about joining communities, forming teams. We should always be aware of the diversity within those communities as well. We should be open to learn more about the diverse backgrounds of our colleagues, and we should learn ways to address those and find ways to work together.
So what are the most common and the most effective modes of delivery for teacher professional development programs?
So suppose that you're just a newly graduated teacher, a teacher candidate, or you're an experienced teacher and you've been reading about diversity, sensitivity, you've been reading about inclusion, inclusive practices, and there are some terminologies that you don't really understand and you want to learn more about that. What would you do? What should you do? Where can you go and where can you learn more about that? Again, I can just make an endless list of opportunities, but we can just, to make things simpler to understand, I can give you 4 basic categories. The first one would be the short trainings. This is the most common of teacher learning, teacher professional development form, I would say. You can think of seminars, webinars, courses, presentations. They are usually short in duration, for example, a few hours or mostly a few days. And they are usually presented by or facilitated by experts coming from academic backgrounds, I would say. And they're really ideal for learning new concepts, new knowledge, but not really building skills in the long term. And we consider it as one way of learning. They are good to start, but they're not enough. So you need to be building on your skills through other forms of professional learning, which brings us to the second form of professional learning activities, which is mentoring. In mentoring, you get to work with a coach, with a mentor. It's usually an experienced teacher in your school community, in your district, or maybe an academic from a university. And through mentoring, you get to have some individual feedback on your practices, on your knowledge, skills, assumptions, and you have some time to plan, to make plans for your learning, to discuss about your progress. And there's space to do some self-reflection and co-reflection with your mentor. And the next step would be team-based learning, I would say. These are small teams that you create within your schools, and you get together to work on a topic that you feel important, or usually in such professional development forums, it is usually an outside expert visiting your school, starting a research project, and you're getting together to learn more about it. This is within the school community. But there is not a hierarchical order between those forms, but the research shows us that the most sustainable form of teacher learning is professional learning communities in which teachers who are thinking about a similar problem or experiencing a similar issue, it could be about any topic, but in our case, diversity, sensitivity, and inclusive practices, they get together and they form a community. They come up with some common values, goals, and a plan, and they sometimes work on their plans together. They invite guests outside the school community. This could be within and outside the school community. And these are designed by teachers and also designed for teachers. This is what it makes it sustainable. And they promote a culture of continuous learning in the school, both for teachers and both for students. And teachers start to have the collective responsibility of the learning of the other teachers in the school community, which we don't really have that in our schools anywhere in the world, I would say. So through these 4 modes of delivery, teachers can continue their learning journey, I would say.
So in the beginning of the video, you told us about how teachers are part of a bigger context and that we should take that into account if we want to change to be sustainable. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so from research we know that there are a lot of professional development activities that have a positive impact on teachers' behaviors. But we also know that this impact kind of fades over time. So you see that after a couple of months, teachers return back to their old ways. Or sometimes the impact is just very limited because it's only impacting a few children within one classroom with one children. So we need to look for ways how to make the change more sustainable, how to make it lasting. And in order to do that, I think we should make professional development more embedded within this wider context that teachers are working in. And embedded here means that it shouldn't stand on its own. So it shouldn't stand on its own in terms of time, in terms of the persons who are working on it, and in terms of the actual context. So with regard to time, it's about a continuous development, so it's better to devote attention to the newly acquired skills or new knowledge on a more regular basis rather than doing just a one-off workshop or talking about it once in a conference. We need some regular attention and regular time devoted to it to make it sustainable. And if you want the impact to be bigger than just one person, it's necessary that we engage teams. So if you learn a new skill or if you are changing your beliefs, try to find a way to engage your colleagues in this as well. And finally, because the context teachers are working in is so different, we shouldn't assume that if we have found something that works very well for one teacher in one particular classroom, that we can just take this and implement it one-on-one in another context and assumes it works just as well. I mean, there's no perfect one-size-fits-all professional development activity. So we should really look for ways how to adapt to professional development in such a way that it's really fitting with the context of the actual teachers.
Yeah, and so what can we do to make sure that continuous professional development is embedded?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that are important. So one of the first things I think is time. Teachers need time to actually devote attention to professional development. So they need time to read books about new things. They need time to observe colleagues, talk with each other about how you are handling certain things, what problems you encounter, but also time to try out new things in the classroom and evaluate to what extent these work for you. And I think a second thing here is also the resources. So for instance, imagine that you want to work on your skills on how to support multilingual children in their language development. And you heard from another teacher, or you read somewhere that using multilingual books for this is very useful, that this can help you. Well, if you don't have any multilingual books within your classroom, it's kind of hard to try out new things. So it's a very basic thing, but time and actual resources, I think, are the very first step that's necessary here. And then second, I think we should look at the organization's structure and culture. So if we want professional development to be continuous, if we want to devote regular attention to this, it helps if there's some kind of organization structure that already promotes this. So that within the way the schools are organized, there is already time reserved for teachers to come together as a team to talk about things. Or that teachers are, for instance, clustered into smaller groups to talk about stuff, or that they are connected to a mentoring body. But it's not just about the structure, but also about the overall culture in the school. So what you would really want is that there is a positive learning school culture, so that all the teachers are really invested in wanting to develop, and they also support their colleagues in trying to continuously develop themselves, trying out new things. And the teachers also believe that they can learn something from one another, but that they also bring something to the table themselves. So if you're a new teacher and you just finish your initial teacher training, of course you can learn a lot from your more experienced teachers within the school, but it's also important that you know that you can, that they can learn new things from you as well. So it's really necessary to have this learning culture together and wanting to improve as a team. And of course, that's not just about the individual teachers within the school, but there are other key persons within the school that play a role in this as well. Think about the school director, a coordinator, special educational staff within the school. They play a very important role in this, and you would preferably see that there's this kind of strong leadership within the school that really promotes this learning culture. So therefore it's very important that we include those kind of key persons in all professional development activities as well. And then the final thing I think it's important, it's that we should be aware that teachers always move within the boundaries of certain policies and certain regulations. So these could be the school policies, but they could also be like local or even national regulations. And they have to stick with everything they do within those boundaries. Now, if you are devoting time on a professional development activity that goes beyond those boundaries, teachers will hit a wall once they come back in the school. So for instance, if teachers are learning about how to support multilingualism in the classroom, and there's a school policy that says you should not allow the minority languages of children into this classroom, well, there's friction, there's a problem. So we should find ways that the professional development activities actually are congruent with these school policies. Or if we think that the school policies are wrong, because for instance they hinder inclusion or they hinder equality, then we should help teachers find ways to push the boundaries of those policies so that they can sort of create new realities from the bottom up.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.